Hello, and welcome to the Naked Audience on WGAF, my fake call letters, and my YouTube channel. So, today's topic is about comedy albums. I'm not necessarily going to be ranking them, but I'd like to discuss some of the ones that kind of shaped my life, the ones that I find to be particularly funny. But in all seriousness about this funny topic, I'm going to go way back. Probably the first comedy album I ever really remember hearing was actually on cassette. Is Let's Get Small by Steve Martin. Yeah, released in 1977. And I can't remember if my family got it, I believe. I'm not really sure. I'm a little bit fuzzy on the memory of how we acquired this cassette. I know we used to belong to Columbia House. Anybody remember Columbia House? That's how I got some of my first cassettes. Maybe that's how we got this. But Let's Get Small. I was 5 years old when it came out, but I'm not sure, like I said, if we got it that year or not. But in all reality, I think we got it maybe a little bit later. But regardless, I find Let's Get Small to be just as funny today as it was when I was a little boy. Of course, I understand a little bit more about it now, or as an adult over the years listening to it. I practically had it memorized at one point. But I did find it to be comedy gold. Because Steve Martin has a very dry humor, but it's such a lame term, dry humor. But what's the term? Sort of it balances between dry and just complete goofball humor. And that's it is a bit of a balancing act, but I think he pulls it off quite well. So yeah, recorded at the boarding house in San Francisco, or as he sings at one point, San Franciscan, California. Yeah, but overall, it's I find it to be classic. With opening up with Ramblin' Man, and then his Vegas act, which is one of my favorites. It's impossible to stick a Cadillac in your nose. That was always a classic. And then also another thing I liked about this over the years, listening to it, of course Steve Martin wasn't known for his profanity, but he would slip it in every now and then, especially on his early stand-up, and it worked because it was always funny. I mean, profanity isn't just funny at face value, so you really have to kind of craft it in a way. There are people like David Cross who just kind of, their stand-up is a little bit more conversational, and he just sort of throws it in there. But Steve Martin, very much like Jim Gaffigan used to do. Jim Gaffigan has become, I guess, one of the clean team. He doesn't use profanity really anymore, which brings me to another comedy album that I really like. Moment Mal. Is it Doing My Time? Hold on, I have to look it up now. I have it on my phone. Just like I have everything on my phone. It's kind of silly. I need to rebuild my vinyl collection. The Last Supper. The Last Supper is a great example of, to me, what makes Jim Gaffigan funny. Of course, one of his more classic pieces is Let's Talk Jesus. But yeah, originally it was trying to find a connection to profanity usage in some comedians' work, which is not what this is about. But while I'm on the topic, since Jim Gaffigan doesn't really use swear or cussies anymore, but he did use it to great effect here by just kind of slipping it in. It seemed very natural, but still funny and effective. So yeah, The Last Supper, that's another great comedy album I can recommend. What are some other? Of course, there's Eddie Murphy, comedian. I know there's some problematic material on that album, but there are other funny things on that album. So I'm not going to completely leave that out just because, different time. Not that that's an excuse necessarily, but it is. So yeah, Eddie Murphy, comedian. What was the other one he had? It was on video too. Delirious, right? Delirious. I think that was the one that was mostly problematic. Comedian does have some problematic material on it, but it's still very funny. Not the problematic stuff, the dated stuff, but there are other things in there. Eddie Murphy was a really great comedian, and I say was because won't go down that road. So this is all kind of building up to something. Not that this is necessarily a ranking video, but I'm kind of saving the best for last because one of my other favorite comedians of all time is, of course, Bill Hicks, and a lot of people would, comment on what they feel is their favorite Bill Hicks album, and all of them are great when you look at it. My particular favorite is actually not even an official release. It's called Dark Poet. I mean, a lot of people look at Relentless or Shock and Awe or even Arizona Bay, and those are all great, without a doubt. And see, the problem with Bill Hicks is that since he passed away so early, we don't have so much variety in material. But that's okay, because to me, the world of comedy albums, while there are a great many, in my book there are only, I can't give a number, but it's a small number that are actually really tight, really well performed. And Dark Poet is, in my opinion, really, I can't even say it's well performed, even though I'm kind of contradicting myself there, but it's his delivery. When you listen to Dark Poet, which you can find, it's a bootleg, I think. It's out there. It's even on YouTube. But look up Dark Poet if you haven't heard it. He sounds kind of funny in it too. I don't know if the pitch is a little bit different, but I also know he happens to be sick, but he still showed up to work, which is kind of a no-no. But he had some kind of cold, and you could hear it, and he seems miserable. Like he does seem miserable in a lot of his acts. But Dark Poet, it's he does have kind of a new twist on a lot of the same material that maybe you've heard on various other performances. But the way he performs it on Dark Poet is just too sweet to ignore. And of course, he does have contempt for his audience a little bit. I mean, we've heard a lot about how Larry David had contempt for his audience, but to me that was all performance. And maybe it is a little bit with Bill Hicks, but you get the sense that it's coming from a real place because he's just so sick of just spewing the same stuff. I mean, he'll write new stuff, right? But he doesn't need to, because he does kind of riff on other things. There are a lot of things on Dark Poet that you won't find on any of his other performances. And but a lot of the material that is repeated on Dark Poet, if you haven't guessed, we're playing a drinking game. How many times I say Dark Poet, a little bit of gasoline. But but some of the familiar bits that he uses on Dark Poet, I just have a little bit of a different character to them. And I think it's because of his attitude, and because has a cold or a flu or something, and he's just exhausted, but it doesn't stop him, you know. And all the rage is there, no matter how tired he might sound. He still works up that rage, that famous rage, especially at this Just for Laughs Comedy Festival performance, which is also probably one of his all-time great performances, where he's jumping up and down, screaming, hating on New Kids on the Block. That one is probably my second favorite. I know this isn't a ranking video, but Dark Poet, that has to be, just in my opinion, and maybe you have to know and be familiar with Bill Hicks to really appreciate it, but not necessarily. It might help in some ways, especially if you're familiar with the bits and you hear the bits in a very different tone on Dark Poet. But yeah, that is another great comedy album I can recommend. So so there are many more comedy albums out there. You know, I used to be a big fan of Dennis Miller. Used to. You know, I think his Black and White, which is what was his second stand-up special, that one in particular I think is really strong. His first stand-up special that he did, I think for HBO, that is really great. That was released on an album called the Off-White album. That was pretty great. Black and White I think is even stronger. But the problem that I have with Dennis Miller is, even back then, even when I really liked him, is they did kind of shred on the working class hillbillies, so to speak. I mean, to me that's low-hanging fruit. At the time maybe you didn't hear so much of it in stand-up comedy, but I think of course they are jokes and they were funny, and that kind of dates it too. So I can't necessarily say I recommend those early Dennis Miller performances, but they are good if you try to find something funny about Dennis Miller. Those first two stand-up specials are his best. After that, in my opinion, he kind of floundered after that, and of course today he's just completely off his rocker. I don't even know what he's about anymore, and I don't care, quite frankly. This is going into politics now. You know, Dennis Miller has drifted away politically, but a lot of comedians today, they drift politically, but that's fine. That's just whatever. I'd like to think if Bill Hicks were alive today, he'd definitely be on the right side of history, you know. Kind of following, not even following in the footsteps of George Carlin, because a lot of the things Bill Hicks said not even hinted, through fuel and utter rage against the political system. He definitely had a keen sense of how things operated, and that then in turn reminds me of George Carlin, who a few years later did the whole it's a big club and you ain't in it, that whole bit. But if Bill Hicks were alive today, I think he would still lash out. He wouldn't join one side or the other the way a lot of comedians do today, which I think is most unfortunate, because I think being on the outside, you have a pretty good realistic view of how these things operate. And of course that kind of goes outside the realm of comedy. But Bill Hicks did a really great job of that, you know. So the only other comedian I can think of, I know now I'm not on albums anymore, but now I'm just on comedians, but just really quickly while I'm on that topic, the only other comedian right now that seems to be seeing through a lot of the bullshit out there is Jimmy Dore. I know a lot of the sexy, trendy, so-called progressive liberals don't like him at all because he won't suck up to the Democratic Party. That's fine. That's just them, you know. I think that's just their way into the club, you know. But I can't think of... I mean, there are comedians out there who are conservative and Republican, and I'm not crazy about those guys either. I mean, naturally I wouldn't. I mean, listen, I'm not going to get into all that, but yeah, so that's that. Okay. Nope. Not to take.
Boom.